Hello Elite members, welcome to another roster review. Today we've got Waz's Possess Bomb. He sent in a Possess Bomb and I thought it was pretty cool. So I thought let's go through this today and have a look how it works, how to play against it, and how we can make it slightly better maybe. So, step number one guys, the list. Just before we talk about the list, guys, talking about lists, if you would like to submit your list and have the chance of it getting roster reviewed on here, please use the link below. Should be on the screen all the time to submit a list. Right then, let's have a look what's in this list. So first thing to know is it's 3 patrols to try and keep it nice and cheap. 1 patrol, of course, is free because the Warlord comes from it, and the other 2 patrols then just cost 4 CP. A patrol is the cheapest way of getting another detachment into the army to bring different rules in, and this Possess Bomb works because there are different rules from different factions in here, and that's exactly why you need the patrols. So the patrols are better because also they give you some troops that can, you know, play the mission a bit better for you, and at the same time you're not paying as many CPs to be able to get all these special rules in that you need to make the army work. So first of all, we're going to go with the Slaanesh Demon Patrol because that's got the Warlord in it. And that has a Keeper of Secrets in it with Delightful Agonies, which is a spell that gives a 6 Infernal Pain, and Cacophonic Choir, which is a Mortal Wound spell. And the Keeper is the Warlord. So this detachment is free. It is an Exalted Keeper. There was no Exalted trait listed on the army list. Personally, what I would go for here is the one that makes you -1 to wound from ranged attacks, because the 4-up invulnerable one's not as important because you can get a 4-up invulnerable if you want it with a stratagem. So personally, I would take the one that makes her -1 to wound from ranged weapons. And then her Warlord trait is Celerity of Slaanesh, which means you add 3 inches to her movement. She hits hard. She's really fast moving, especially with the +3 inches, guys. Now she's got a 17-inch move characteristic, and she can advance and then still charge after advancing, which is insane. You know, if she rolls a 6, she moves 23 inches and then charges. So she's very quick, and she hits like a ton of bricks in combat. She's got 10 attacks, and they're all flat 3 damage. So she's really cool to have in the army. Then you've got Celeste. Now, Celeste also hits like an absolute ton of bricks when Celeste gets there, and also fights twice innately, and then has Hysterical Frenzy, which is a psychic power that lets a Slaanesh demon unit fight in the psychic phase, which is incredibly powerful. Brilliant spell to use. And Symphony of Pain, which hits an enemy unit and makes them -1 to hit, which is a nice tool to have in the back pocket as well. The troop for this detachment is a unit of 20 Demonettes, and that's because you could put a unit of 20 Demonettes in reserve with the Demon Stratagem for 1 command point. Then you have a Thousand Suns Patrol detachment, which is just 1 HQ and 1 troop. Now, it's Cult of Duplicity, so everybody knows the Sorceress Facade Psychic Power, which is like the Thousand Suns version of Gate of Infinity. They know that in addition to all of their powers. It's nice that they know that in addition to, rather than having to sort one of their powers out. It's really cool. And that just gives them a bit more maneuverability around the board. And in that detachment, you have a Sorcerer who has Warp Time and Prescience, of course, 2 of the, you know, the most pivotal powers to make this kind of army work. So he's got Warp Time and Prescient, and then also has the Dark Matter Crystal, so can teleport a friendly Thousand Suns unit within 12 inches or himself once per battle. And then you've got, as the troops, you've got a unit of 20 rubrics. Now, 20 rubrics are incredibly tough to shift, and they're no slouches when it comes to dealing some damage because they have Inferno Bolters, which are -2 AP. They're normal bolters, but they're -2 AP, which is very tasty. And then finally, we have an Alpha Legion Patrol detachment, and this is where quite a lot of the magic comes from. So you have a Chaos Lord who's just got a Chainsword and a Bolt Pistol with a Mark of Slaanesh. Now, quite clearly, he's just there to give the reroll 1s to hit aura, so every unit within 6 inches of himself. And then you have a Master of Possession. Now, the Master of Possession is actually really cool. So with Cursed Earth, he gives Legion demon units. They don't even have to be the same mark as him, just they have to be of the same Legion and have the demon keyword. So he gives Legion demon units +1 to their invulnerable save, giving 1 key unit a 4-up invulnerable save, which is really cool. And then he's got the Infernal Power, Psychic Power, which means friendly Legion Demon units again, reroll ones to hit and wound whilst their unit is within 6 inches of him. Very powerful. And he's got the Mark of Sinesh. Then in the troops, you've got a unit of 5 Chaos Marines, just because they're obsec and they're tough. If they go into an objective, they're pretty hard to shift, because if they're touching anything that gives them light cover, then they've got a 2-up armor save. And they're just annoying to kill, really. It's a cheap 70-point unit that obviously makes the detachment cheaper to take, but can also play the mission for you. Then in the elite slot, you've got a unit of 20 Sinesh possessed with an icon of excess. Now, this is, of course, the magic. This is what the Master of Possession is in the army to protect. And we'll go on to what they do in the how it works bit. Then we've got a unit of 5 Havocs with 4 las cannons in there. Now, this unit, it says no mark on, on the army roster, and I think that's a mistake. I believe it's meant to be Mark of Sinesh. If it's not, it definitely should be Mark of Sinesh. So we'll go with that. Let's go for the most optimal way. So we've got 5 Havocs with 4 las cannons, and we'll say they have the Mark of Sinesh. And then, of course, in the flyer slot, there is a Helldrake with a Bale Flamer. It's a nice little cool addition. Goes around the back and it becomes a harassing unit. So that's what the list is. Let's have a look at how it works. Okay, so that was the list. Let's have a look at how it works now. So let's go in the same order that we were in before. So the Sinesh Patrol. Now, the Sinesh Patrol is quite important to the way that the list works, because having a pure Sinesh Demon detachment gives you the locus of Sinesh. And the locus that you get for having pure Sinesh Demon detachment is, while a friendly Sinesh Demon unit is within 6 inches of a character, a Sinesh Demon character, then they can charge even in a turn in which they advanced, which is really quite cool. So it's not as important for the 20 demonettes in this army, because they'll be dropping in from reserve, hopefully on an objective, or charging from reserve, because they're a bit brittle. They won't be a unit that you want to be running across the board. They'll be in reserve. They'll drop in either backfield to protect your backfield, and 20 demonettes can have quite a large footprint, so they can cover a lot of ground and stop deep strikers coming in and stuff like that. Or they're going to drop in at the front and go for a charge and be a distraction unit, and they can also hit pretty hard. And don't forget, they have their stratagem Acquiescence for 1 CP, where they can reduce the attacks characteristic of any unit within 3 inches of their unit at the start of the fight phase. So they can be a lot more survivable than you think, and a lot more killy than you think at the same time. But they'll be basically charging from reserves. However, Celesk and the Keeper of Secrets can both advance and charge, because they are within 6 inches of themselves, because it is old rules. Which makes them really dangerous, because they're super quick, They're, especially this Keeper with the Celerity of Sinesh Warlord trait that she's got. She already moves 17 inches flat. So she's going 17 plus D6 and then can still charge after that, which is horrible. Of course, I think she's supposed to have the Exalted trait that makes her -1 to wound from ranged attacks. That just makes her very tough. She can, of course, get a 4+ invulnerable save with the Demonic Surge stratagem. And then on top of that, she can give herself a 6-up Feel No Pain with Delightful Agonies. And yeah, she's really tough, basically, and quick. But the only downside to her is she can be targeted. But that's exactly why Celesk is in the army, because you do want a character to live, because there is a key unit in this army that is a Sinesh Demon unit that can advance and charge when around a character. So you want a character that cannot be targeted because they've got less than 10 wounds. And Celesk is the perfect target for that. And then, yes, let's move on to the Alpha Legion Patrol. Now, the reason I want to move on to the Alpha Legion Patrol is because this is the bit that ties in with the last detachment extremely well. So let's start off with the 20 Sinesh Possessed. Now, the reason why you want to start off with the Possessed is because they have the mark of Sinesh, and they also have the demon keyword. So they do class as Slanesh demons. That means after advancing, if they are within 6 inches of your Keeper of Secrets or Celesk, they can still declare a charge, which is absolutely huge. And then they have the icon of excess, meaning that their Death to the False Emperor, instead of triggering on a 6+, it triggers on a 5+. And you got to remember, Death to the False Emperor is not unmodified. It can be modified. So if you were to chuck Prescience on this unit, then they would be hitting on 2s and then 4s, 5s, and 6s would trigger their Death to the False Emperor ability, which is silly good considering how Marine or Imperium heavy the meta currently is. So that's what the Possessed are there for. They are an absolute beat stick. And then, of course, you can use the forward operative stratagem on them for 1 CP when you deploy them. And that means at the start of the first battle round, but before the first turn begins, they can make a move of up to 9 inches, which is insane. And then on top of that, you've got to, take into consideration their threat. So they can move 9 inches before the game. Then they can move 7 inches in your turn. That's 16, and advance. So if they're all a 6, they've gone 22 inches from your line. And then, of course, you can 23 inches from your line because they move 7 inches. So they've gone 23 inches from your deployment zone. They are now 1 inch from the enemy's deployment zone in the furthest away deployments that you can get. So if you've got a hammer and anvil type deployment where you're playing long edge to long edge, then there are 24 inches between you, and that's the maximum. So you're now 1 inch away from your opponent's deployment zone. Then if you cast Warp Time on them, you get to move another 7 inches. You can't advance again, because it's just a move now. You can't advance with it with Warp Time due to the new FAQs, but you move another 7 inches. So you've now gone 6 inches into your opponent's deployment zone, and you can still charge from there if there is a Slanesh demon character within 6 inches of you. And of course, you can just chain backwards, and the Keeper and Celeste move so quickly, they can definitely keep up with the Possessed Bomb. So they just, they give this massive threat range off. The minute that you put those Slanesh down, if you just work it out, the 9-inch move, then the 2 7-inch moves is 23 inches total, with up to a 6-inch advance. 23 inches total, and then up to a 6-inch advance, which is 29 inches. And then you can charge after that, meaning 41 inches. You have a 41-inch threat range, meaning, people can't really stay out of that at all. Even if you do hammer and anvil, your deployment zones now with the shorter tables are only 18 inches, and then there are 24 inches between you. So 18 and 24 is only 42 inches. So from the front of your deployment zone to the back of your opponent's board edge is 42 inches. But this unit can charge up to 41, meaning your opponent can't even back line if they have 32 mil bases. You can always have a possibility of a charge with this army from turn 1 now. So people are going to be very afraid of those Possessed, and it forces people to play on the back foot quite a lot. And it confuses people. People don't understand what they should be doing against this bomb. And I think that's what makes it so dangerous. And then on top of that, you've got the unit of 5 Havocs with the 4 las cannons in. Now, those are just a perfect unit because you've got to combo them with the Chaos Lord. So the Chaos Lord is basically there just to sit with them, give them reroll ones to hit. And, Havocs with, you can make them hit on 2s. And then reroll 1s because you do have prescience in the armies coming a little later on. But you can basically make them hit on 2s and reroll 1s with 4 las cannon shots. That can do a lot of damage. You can pretty much open a tank with that, especially if you use 1 CP and do Veterans of the Long War on them. They're then strength 9 las cannons with +1 to wound. So you'll even be wounding Imperial Knights and other toughness 8 vehicles on a 2+. So you'll be hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, and then wounding on 2s against pretty much anything, which is very scary. So, if you get 4 wounds on a tank, bearing in mind most tanks have a 3-up armor save, they've just got 4 6-up saves at that point. 3 go throughs, 3d6 damage. And then if they are Mark of Slanesh, you can spend 2 CP and you can fire that unit again. So the Havocs are a very cheap, very dangerous unit. They're very efficient for their points at the moment, and that's why they're in the army, to offer some long range decent fire support. The Helldrake I think is a little bit out of place in this army, but I can see that it scoots around, it's there to harass units, it can fly very far forwards and charge so it can tie up things that you don't really want shooting into your army. It's really cool for that. But personally, I'm not a big fan of Helldrakes at the moment. The 5 Chaos Marines, like we said, they are just a cheap, tough to shift, objective secured unit that helps you play the mission. And then, like we said, the Master of Possession is there for Cursed Earth and Infernal Power. He's there purely for those two powers to buff the Possessed unit. Gives them a 4-up invulnerable with Cursed Earth. Cursed Earth goes off. Those Sinesh Possessed have got a 4-up invulnerable, and they're re-rolling ones to hit and wound, which is very nasty. And then finally, you've got that Thousand Suns Patrol detachment, which is the Cult of Duplicity. And like we were saying, it's so that you can jump these 20 Rubric Marines around the board. And then you've got the Dark Matter Crystal on the Sorcerer. Now, the reason the Dark Matter Crystal is on the Sorcerer is because, you know, you might think, why would you take that relic? It's such a waste when you've now got the Sorcerer's Facade Psychic Power due to being part of the Cult of Duplicity. Now, the answer to that is that power goes off on a 7. A 7. You know, it's an average roll, but I think rolling a 7+, there's about 55% chance of that. So almost half of the time, you will fail to get that power off. So in a key turn, when you really need that 20 Rubric Marine unit to jump somewhere, you can just use the Dark Matter Crystal, and there is no chance of failing that like there is with the power. So you use it in that crucial turn, and I think the Dark Matter Crystal is very big for this army. But then in every other turn, you can use Sorcerer's Facade to bounce around wherever you want, really. And that unit of 20 Rubric Marines is silly tough, guys. Like, absolutely silly tough. They've got a 5 invulnerable, 5 invulnerable standard. Then for 1 CP, they can have a 4-up invulnerable save. And then if you cast Weaver of Fates on them, they can have a 3+ invulnerable save. Now, Weaver of Fates, you normally just put on the Aspiring Sorcerer in the squad, so he can just cast it on his own unit, and that'll give them a 3+ invulnerable save. 3+. And then what you've got to remember is they have the All is Dust rule. Of course, you can't get better than a 3+ invulnerable save. You can't actually improve your save to a 2+ invulnerable save. However, All is Dust does not add 1 to your invulnerable save against 1 damage weapons. It says that when you're attacked by a weapon that has a damage characteristic of 1, you add 1 to the saving throw. So you're not adding 1 to your invulnerable saves, you're just adding 1 to the result on the dice. So essentially, if you roll a 2, you add 1 to it and it becomes a 3, which is a passed invulnerable save. So you do still have a 3+ invulnerable save, but because you add 1 to all your saves, essentially when you're rolling 2s, they pass. So basically you have what is the equivalent of a 2+ invulnerable save against 1 damage attacks. So they're a chaff unit that have 1 wound each that's quite expensive, but is very tough to shift with the kind of guns that you want to put into a chaff unit. And they, of course, are there to protect the possessed because they sit in front of the possessed, and then the possessed can use the conceal stratagem because they're Alpha Legion, so they cannot be targeted unless they are the nearest visible enemy unit. So, you know, you just line these 20 rubrics up in front of them, and they're never going to get shot. Now, you might be thinking, well, if you go first and you've done forward operatives, these Sinesh Possessed are going to be 9 inches forward. Yes, you're correct, but you can use a 1 CP strat called Risen Rubricy on your 20-man rubric unit when you deploy them. You could spend 1 CP and they can deploy anywhere on the board more than 9 inches from your opponent's deployment zone. So they can deploy 9 from your opponent's deployment zone, and then your possessed can move 9 inches out of your deployment zone right up the middle of the board and then do conceal. And even if you're not going second, your opponent will, sorry, even if you're going second, your opponent won't be able to do too much about the possessed because the 20-man rubric squad standing just in front. And of course, the sorcerer in that Thousand Suns detachment has got warp time and prescience. Warp time and prescience. Now, these are big powers to make this list work. The warp time, of course, will be used to move the possessed twice in most situations. And then prescience will most likely be used either on the possessed if they're going to get into something juicy in combat, or if they're not, then it will be used on the havocs, like we were saying earlier, to make them hit on 2s. And that is how the list works. It's really cool because you've got these little units like the five Chaos Marines who can go off and hold an objective that maybe you don't really want to send anybody else in your army to get, just the one that's out of the way. Then you've got a unit of 5 Havocs with las cannons who can hold your backfield objective. They can sit there with your Lord and hold a backfield objective because all they're doing is offering long range fire support. And then you've got things like the Hell Drake and the 20 demonettes and the Keeper of Secrets that just run at your opponent and get there straight away, so that your opponent's spending 1 or 2 turns dealing with the threats that are imminently on them, not being able to pay too much attention to the Rubric Marines, who will have spread out along the middle of the board holding 2 or 3 different objectives, advancing slowly forwards with the Possessed right behind them, that your opponent's not been able to shoot turn 1 because the Rubrics are in front of them. And if you've gone first, you chuck your Keeper up there, chuck the 20 Rubrics at the front, send your Helldrake in, and, your opponent is going to be tied up with trying to kill those units that the Possessed will get in turn 2, which is a nice way for the list to work. So essentially, you're holding a couple of the objectives that you want to, and then you're putting so much pressure on your opponent that they're not being able to fight you for the midfield ones. And eventually, you might be able to break through into theirs because your Possessed moves so quick and hit like an absolute ton of bricks when they get there. So that's how the list works. And you might be thinking, well, it sounds so tough and so fast moving with multiple threats. How can we possibly deal with it? So let's have a look at how we're going to tackle it. So let's see how we're going to tackle this list then. First things first, this list absolutely hates mortal wounds because everything is actually very expensive. Now, you've got this unit of 20 Rubric Marines, right? They're sitting at the front, they're protecting the Possessed. But this unit of 20 Rubric Marines has cost 360 points because each Rubric Marine is 18 points and only has 1 wound. So if you hit them with a smite that does 3 wounds, you've just killed 60 points worth of Rubric Marines, which is insane, with 1 psychic power. So because they're so elite and very expensive and only have 1 wound a model, mortal wounds is like the biggest nightmare for this army to deal with, especially like the Possessed. The Possessed do not like being hit with mortal wounds because they're so expensive. Again, they're 20 points a model, so they're even more than the Rubric Marines. And like I say, that there isn't, very much chaff in this army other than the 20 demonettes, really. Everything else kind of has a purpose and hits pretty hard and doesn't really like to take mortal wounds at all. So anything you can do, if you can just get 2 or 3 smites in your army, that will really help against this, because averagely then you'll kill 6 or 7 Rubric Marines in a turn, like just by casting 3 smites, which is very nice. It kills almost half of the unit, and at that point the Rubric Marines have to roll a 1 to pass their morale or spend 2 CPs. And that's one thing you've got to think about this army as well, is it is quite limited on CPs. Now, I know the patrols have been taken, but the patrols have been taken to minimize the amount of CPs you use before the game, without realizing that actually there are quite a few CPs you want to spend in the game, and the way that the list works might not be able to utilize that to the maximum. So think about it. The Slaanesh patrol is free, but you've spent 1 CP to take the Exalted Keeper of Secrets in that detachment. Then you're most likely going to be spending 1 CP to put the 20 demonettes in reserve. The Thousand Suns patrol costs you 2 CPs, and the relic from that detachment costs 1. Then the Alpha Legion patrol costs 2 CPs as well. So you've spent 7 CPs before the game, pretty much. You're starting this game with 5 command points. Now, if you want to conceal the Possessed, which you pretty much definitely going to want to do turn 1, and also you're 100% going to want to use forward operatives to make your opponent scared of where the Possessed might go if you move turn 1. So to get the most out of this army, the player playing the Possessed will be using forward operatives and will definitely conceal for at least 1 turn in the game. So they're down to 2 command points. And then even if they gain 1, they're up to 3. They've got 3 command points. There are so many things in this army they want to use those on. So, they're not really going to be using too many strats to balance here and there. And they're very tight on their detachments. And so that's why, like, mortal wounds that can pick off these expensive units that cost very low, and then they can't do very much about it in terms of using strats to help them out, is just a massive advantage, in my opinion. And then another thing that you want to consider is fast combat units. So the whole idea of this keeper that runs in your face along with a Helldrake, and then the rubrics line up in front of the possessed as far forward as they can go, is that your opponent wants you to hit from the front so that you can't really get to the possessed until you get through everything. But what you want to consider is any unit that can jump over or move so quickly that it can get into the possessed without having to go through the shields that are in front of the possessed, essentially. So, things like Shining Spears with Quicken that can move twice. They can just move 16 inches, then they can move a further 16 inches. They can fly straight over the screens and go right into the possessed. Those are the kind of combat threats I'm talking about here. And like deep striking threats from combat as well, like Zephyrim squads that can deep strike into gaps that are made by Seraphim and then charge through that way. Those are the kind of things that you want to be using here. Also, rerolls to wound are very important because you want to be able to take out things like the Keeper of Secrets. And if she's -1 to wound from ranged weapons, you're going to want some form of rerolls in there. But especially in combat, you need to get the most out of what you can because, of course, she does only have a 5-up invulnerable save. So anything that you can get through to her will hurt her quite a lot. The other thing you want to think about is multiple damage weaponry, especially from shooting. Because you got to remember as well, although the Rubric Marines can get basically a 2-up invulnerable save, it is only against weapons that have got a damage characteristic of 1. So if you've got damage 2 or damage D3 or anything like that, then the All is Dust rule does not work, and they can basically get to a maximum of a 3+ invulnerable save. Maximum of a 3+ invulnerable save. So you got to think at that point, every save failed is a dead 18-point model. And the brilliant thing about it is there's quite a lot of guns at the moment being brought into the meta that are damage 2 and have got a lot of shooting. The reason that this list is going to excel at the moment is, of course, it's built on the logic that people are moving away from 2 damage weaponry because of things like Death Guard and even Deathwing with the Ancient Banner, the Relic Banner, where they can reduce damage by 1. There are so many rules coming out now where armies can reduce damage characteristics by 1 that people are going away from 2 damage weapons because they're essentially just being reduced to 1 damage. And I think that's what this list is playing off here, is that people are not going to be bringing 2 damage weapons. They're going to be bringing a lot of 1 damage firepower that this has great saves against. But the minute you start bringing some of these to it, like, if you bring Ravagers to the table now, which have 2 disintegrator shots each, if you bring Knights, which have got 12 Gatling cannon shots each that are flat 2 damage, anything like that, a third of the saves that these rubrics take will go through, and you're going to kill an 18-point model for every save fails. So that's what you want to have a look into, and especially in combat as well. Multiple damage in combat is really going to hurt against the rubrics. Also, you want to bring a few high damage shots as well, because the one mistake of this army, in my opinion, like the biggest mistake of this army, is that the Helldrake and the Keeper just have a target on them, because they're the only 2 models in the entire army that want to be shot by big weapons. Now, if you imagine as well, you've got someone's got their Sinesh possessed, and then they've got the Rubric squad in front of them. They're going to want to use Conceal on the possessed so that you can't shoot the possessed. Now, if you've got weaponry that's D6 damage or D3 plus 3 damage, you're not going to want to shoot that at the Rubric Marines because they're single wound models. And, you probably don't have very many shots with that kind of weapon. But they've given you targets in the fact that they've gone, here's a Helldrake with a 5-up invulnerable, and here's a Keeper with a 5-up invulnerable. You can shoot them with your big weapons. So I think that's the one mistake of this list, is that they've given you targets. So what you should do is you should take advantage of the targets and hit them with some big weaponry. And the final thing that you can do that I think is very effective against this army is having cheap screening units. Because if you'll notice, there isn't very much shooting in this army. It has to hit the front and it has to go through that way. And, the rubrics can fire twice for just 1 CP, but they need to have remained stationary in their movement phase to do that, which is not going to be happening very much of the time. So they're going to be walking towards you, trying to shoot you with one shot a model. And it's, that's not reliable shooting. And they've got this Havoc squad at the back of the board, but it's just got 4 las cannons in it. It's not going to clear chaff. If you've put like a 20-man unit of conscripts or gaunts or boys or just anything at the front, Kroot, if you're a Tau army, slow them down with things like Kroot. You put these cheap screening units at the front and they need to spend turns charging and chomping through them, which buys you more time to shoot them and pick your battles, charge where you want to and stuff like that. So that, in my opinion, is one of the most effective ways of tackling the list. So that's how we would tackle it. Let's have a look at some modifications that we make, because the list can actually be made a whole lot scarier. So looking at the modifications here then, guys, there are some really cool ones you can do. Now, the Helldrake, in my opinion, is a bit of a mistake. He's a bit of an out-of-place unit in this army. Now, I get that you want to chuck threats forward to take the pressure off the possessed, but a Helldrake is not the way to do that. So let's have a look at what we would do. First of all, swap out the Helldrake and take a unit of Havocs that have got Reaper chain cannons. We've got one unit of Havocs that have got 4 las cannons. Brilliant if you're playing against big elite stuff. And you can spend 2 CBs to fire them twice if you're playing against big stuff, which makes them incredible. But what if you're playing against a Horde army? There's not much in the way of firepower that you've got here, or anything that to kill screens and stuff, which we just discussed about. What would be the ways of tackling this list is hit them with cheap chaff units and just tie them in there and make sure they can't move through. Now, this is a good way of dealing with that kind of threat, is having a unit of Havocs with 4 Reaper chain cannons in there. Now, that's 32 shots. A Reaper chain cannon is 8 shots per gun. So you've got 32 shots, a strength 5 -1/1 damage with Veterans of the Long War if you wanted as well. So any screen, any cheap screen is going to be max toughness 4. Like Orc Boys are toughness 4. But if you use Veterans of the Long War, you're wounding them on 2s as well. Now, if you stand by the Chaos Lord, if you really want to, and you're playing against things that are, mass horde, you put prescience on these guys and you go, right, I got 32 shots. I'm hitting on 2s rolling 1s, which is most likely going to be 31 hits. And then I'm wounding you on 2s, which is about 25 wounds. 25 wounds on a horde unit is just going to smush it. And then you can spend 2 CBs and fire again. So you can do up to 50 wounds averagely on a horde unit, which is incredible. Or any unit that's toughness 4, you can put 50 wounds on, which is incredible. That's so much better value point for point than a Helldrake. That chain cannon Havoc unit should most definitely be put into the army. Now, you might be thinking, well, in that case, we've just taken away some of the threat, some of the things that were going to run up front and take pressure off the possessed. Now, the next thing I want to say is I don't think the Sinesh detachment is necessary at the moment, because if you move these possessed 9 inches before the game, and then you move them 7 again, they've gone 16. You can move them another 7 with warp time. They've gone 23 inches. They're standing on your opponent's door, and then they can charge from there. So your opponent still has to be like 10 inches back from their front line. And if they're not, they're going to get charged. And if they are, then all it means is the possessed are going to get in their turn 2, which is most of the time what you want to do with them anyway, because you don't want to send them in their turn 1 recklessly, with your opponent being able to deal with them then and reducing the threat of your army quite a lot and making them able to be able to come for your backfield. So that's a big thing as well. And that's the reason that I don't think you'll need the Sinesh Patrol, because you can just move very quickly the possessed anyway. So if you don't need the Sinesh Patrol, let's make some use of those points. So the Keeper of Secrets will, of course, go, and so will Celesk. Now, if you've lost the Helldrake and you've lost the Keeper of Secrets, you've lost all of the threat that's going to run forward and take pressure off the possessed. So we need to put something in there that's going to run forward and take pressure off the possessed. Now, I would put Mortarion in there. Mortarion is the perfect bullet magnet for this list. He's way tougher than a Helldrake and a Keeper of Secrets put together ×2, and he's even tougher than that. So if Mortarion is running at the front of your army and there are concealed possessed behind him, you may not even have to give your opponent the Rubric Marines every turn. They could be used in a different role. You know, they can be used to jump around, harass units off objectives, and be incredibly hard to shift off multiple objectives while the possessed run up the board behind Mortarion not being able to be targeted without much threat of Mortarion going down in front of them. So that is definitely what I would do. And another thing to note is Mortarion is 110 points less than that Slaanesh Patrol detachment, meaning you could also put in an extra sorcerer who can take Delightful Agonies, but the Chaos version of it. So that means you can give the possessed a 5-up Feel No Pain, which is incredible. So they can have a 4-up Invulnerable save from the Master of Possession, and then have a 5-up Feel No Pain from the sorcerer. And that's 100% what I would do. Imagine Mortarion running in front of that possessed bomb, and Mortarion is an army in his own right. If he gets in there, he's going to rip things to shreds, and then you got this 20-man possessed bomb that you can't touch until Mortarion's dead, and they're going to hit you just as hard as he does. So I think that makes the list so much harder and so much scarier to play against. On top of that, I think the Lord, the Chaos Lord in this army, although he is just there to give reroll ones to hit to the 2 Havoc units, the Havocs are not very good in combat at all, so they will need some protection against backfield dropping units as well. And I think the way that you do it is you give the Chaos Lord a jump pack. The Chaos Lord's already in the army. Give him a jump pack, and give him some decent weapons like a pair of lightning claws, and give him the demon claws or something like that, or a thunder hammer. Just give him anything, something that can help him bat away units or make your opponent think twice about coming for your havocs with combat units. So yeah, the Lord should be upgraded in that right. And the final thing also is rhinos, man. Rhinos are so cheap. If you were to drop, say, 2 Rubric Marines from the army, go down to 18, which isn't the end of the world, and 2 possessed, which also isn't the end of the world. You go down to 18-man units for both of them. You drop 2 Rubrics, you drop 2 possessed, and you've pretty much got a Rhino in the army. And a Rhino would be perfect for the 2 Havoc squads because they don't really have much protection other than the fact that they're toughness 5. Now, if they go in a Rhino, it just adds that extra layer of, 1, protection, but 2, extra threat. You know, they can move 3 inches out of the Rhino and then move a further 5 inches and still shoot after moving with no penalty, which is incredible. And also the Rhino gives you an extra unit to run up front in front of the possessed, keeping them concealed until the Rhino dies as well. Covers another angle for firing arcs. And those are the modifications I would make. So if you're going to play this list, guys, try the first version out, try my modified version out. Let me know which one you think is better. And if you find your own combos, of course, feel free to use them. But man, imagine Mortarion at the front of this list. That's all I'm going to say. I really hope you've enjoyed this roster review, guys. And like I said, if you would like the chance of your list being reviewed here, please submit it with the link below. And until the next video, guys, see you later.